Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seven Continents, One Story.
Hi there. So glad you're joining us today.
Hey everyone, great to have you here.
I'm Nils, professor of history from Sweden.
I'm Celine, joining you from Edinburgh, Scotland.
And I'm Ethan, calling in from Malta.
Together, we explore incredible stories from history across all 7 continents.
Every episode brings you a new journey through time.
From ancient civilizations to modern moments that changed everything.
So let's begin.
Okay, I need you to think about a number for a second, 1.9 billion. That is roughly 1 in 4 people on this entire planet, 1 in 4. And all of it, the prayers, the mosques, the fasting in Ramadan, the pilgrimage to Mecca, the call to prayer echoing across 1,000 cities every single day, all of it traces back to one night, one cave, one man, 15 words.
And we do not know the exact date of that night. We know the approximate year, 610 of the Common Era. We know the approximate place, but the precise moment? Lost.
Which is actually one of the things that makes this story so remarkable. One of the most consequential events in human history happened quietly, in the dark, on a mountainside, with no witnesses, just a man and whatever came to him.
Welcome to 7 Continents, One Story. I am Ethan, a teenager from Malta who can never quite believe how much history there is to learn.
I am Nils, your resident history professor, and today's topic has been on my list for a very long time.
And I am Celine, a librarian from Edinburgh. I have spent years reading about this story, and I am still finding new things in it.
Today, we are going back to the Arabian Peninsula. The year is 610 of the Common Era, and we are going to tell the story of Muhammad's first revelation, the night in Cave Hira, that launched one of the great transformations in human history.
And before we begin, I have to say, I know this is a topic that can feel sensitive. Some of our listeners will be Muslim, some will not. We are going to tell this story the way we tell every story, with care, with honesty, with respect for the sources.
We are historians here, not theologians. What we can say with certainty is that something happened in that cave, and that what followed changed the world.
And I have something on my desk, something that might give us a clue about where we are going.
Already? We just started.
I know. Clue number 1. It is written on parchment, very old parchment, the kind made from animal skin, stretched and scraped until it is almost translucent. And it is written in a script I want you to think about. The letters have no dots, no vowel marks, like a skeleton of a language. The consonants, with the reader expected to fill in the vowels from memory.
That is unusual.
Very unusual. That is all I am saying for now. Hold on to that image. Before we travel back to 7th century Arabia, a quick word about our partner, CYPRUSREALRETURNS. You know, studying the ancient world teaches you one consistent lesson. Lasting wealth comes from strategic, secure foundations. Not speculation. That is exactly what Cyprus Real Returns offers. Secure real estate investments in Cyprus with guaranteed 6 to 12% annual returns, fully backed by the Cyprus Land Registry. Professional management handles everything, completely hands-off. With Cyprus tourism at 4 million visitors annually and property values rising nearly 8% each year, the returns can fund your own historical explorations. The places we talk about, you can actually visit them. Visit CYPRUSREALRETURNS.com to find out how. Let me take you there. Arabia, the early 7th century. The great empires of the age, Byzantium to the north and west, the Sassanid Persian Empire to the north and east, have been at war with each other off and on for generations. They're exhausted, they are weakened. Between them lies Arabia, a peninsula of deserts and mountains and scattered oases, controlled by nobody, home to hundreds of competing tribes.
I want to be careful here because Arabia is sometimes described as a pure wasteland or a blank slate before Islam. It was not. It was a complicated, sophisticated place.
Absolutely right. Mecca, the city we are going to, was a genuinely important commercial hub. It sat at the intersection of major trade routes, goods from Yemen and Oman in the south moving north towards Syria and the Mediterranean. Luxury items, spices, textiles, frankincense. And Mecca had something else, the Kaaba.
What was the Kaaba before Islam?
The Kaaba, the cube-shaped structure that still stands at the heart of the Grand Mosque in Mecca, was in the early 7th century surrounded by 360 tribal idols. Pilgrims from across the region came to visit their particular deity. The tribe that controlled Mecca, the Quraysh, managed this religious site and profited enormously from the pilgrim traffic. Hotels, food, trade, religion and commerce completely intertwined.
Which is a context we need to keep in mind throughout this story. When Muhammad begins preaching one God only, all idols false, he is not just making a theological argument, he is threatening an entire economy.
So the resistance to him later is not just about belief, it is about money.
It is always about both, isn't it?
And the Arabian world of 610 CE was socially stratified in specific ways. Tribal identity, what the Arabs called asabiya, was the supreme loyalty. Your tribe protected you. Without a tribe, you were vulnerable. Within tribal structures, the strong protected the weak, but also exploited the weak. Slavery was common. The practice of killing female infants, buried alive in some tribes, was documented if not universal. Women's status varied enormously. Some women were merchants, landowners, leaders. Others had no more rights than property.
The religious landscape was also more complex than many people assume. There were significant Jewish communities in Yathrib, the city that would later become Medina, and in other oases. There were Christian communities in southern Arabia, on the borders with Byzantine territory. And there was a group the sources call the Hanifs, Arab monotheists who rejected the tribal polytheism without fully committing to either Judaism or Christianity. Some of them were seeking something, though they could not have said what exactly.
Into this world, in approximately 570 CE, the traditional sources call it the Year of the Elephant, referring to an Abyssinian military expedition against Mecca that failed. A child was born to a woman named Amina and her husband Abdullah of the Banu Hashim clan of the Quraysh. His father died before his birth, or shortly after, on a trading journey. His mother died when the child was approximately 6 years old. His grandfather Abd al-Muttalib, the respected head of the Banu Hashim, took him in. Then his grandfather died. His uncle Abu Talib became his guardian.
So he was orphaned twice over, essentially.
3 times, in a sense, you say, each of his early protectors taken from him. And yet he thrived. The sources consistently describe him as someone who attracted trust. He became known throughout Mecca by a nickname, Al-Amin, the faithful one, the trustworthy one. He was an honest man in a merchant society, and that was worth more than almost anything.
He became a trading agent, and one of his clients was a woman named Khadija bint Khuwailid.
Khadija. I want to spend some time with her because she is today's unsung hero, and I want people to understand what kind of person she was before we get to the revelation itself. She was a widow, twice by most accounts. She had inherited her late husband's trading businesses and expanded them. She was wealthy, she was respected, she hired trading agents and managers, sent caravans to Syria, managed contracts. In a society where many women had little legal standing, Khadija was an independent businesswoman of substantial means.
She sounds extraordinary.
She was. And when she hired Muhammad to lead a caravan to Syria, her agent came back with a remarkable report. Not just the goods were sold, but this man is honest. He conducts himself with unusual integrity. He is calm under pressure. He treats people fairly.
And then Khadija did something that takes some unpacking in its historical context.
She proposed marriage.
She proposed to him?
She sent an intermediary to Muhammad with a marriage proposal. She was older than him. The sources disagree on by how much, but she was older. She was wealthier. She was already established. And she chose him.
And I find this remarkable because in so many retellings, Khadija becomes a background character, Muhammad's wife. The independent merchant who made an active choice, who identified a person of character and proposed to him, she gets smoothed out of the story.
They married. Muhammad was approximately 25, and the marriage was, by all accounts, deeply affectionate. She bore him several children, including daughters who survived to adulthood. 2 sons died in infancy, and she remained his closest companion.
In the years before the revelation, Muhammad developed a habit of retreat. He would go to Cave Hira, a cave on the mountainside of Mount Jabal al-Nur, about 2 kilometers from Mecca, and spend days or weeks there alone in meditation and prayer. It was called tahannuth. He would take supplies, sit in the narrow cave, and think.
Did other people do that, or was it unusual?
The Hanifs and some other spiritual seekers practiced forms of withdrawal, but Muhammad's commitment to it was notable. He was a successful, comfortable man choosing to spend extended time in isolation and contemplation. He was, by 610 CE, approximately 40 years old. He had been doing this for some time.
Whatever he was looking for in that cave, whatever question he was carrying, he was about to receive an answer he had not expected.
It is the month of Ramadan, 610 of the Common Era. Muhammad is in Cave Hira, as he has been many times before. The sources say it was during the final nights of the month. The nights Muslims today call Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power. I want to be honest with our listeners about what I can and cannot say here as a historian. The hadith, the recorded sayings and accounts of Muhammad transmitted through chains of narrators and compiled in the 9th century, give us a detailed account of what happened. Those accounts are what I am about to describe. The earliest source is Sahih al-Bukhari, compiled in approximately 846 CE, which records the story as transmitted through Khadijah herself and later through Aisha.
So it comes from people who were there, or people who knew the people who were there.
Exactly, and with that framing, here is what the sources describe. Muhammad was in the cave, and the angel Gabriel, appeared. The angel commanded, Iqra, read, recite, proclaim. Muhammad replied, Ma ana bikari, I cannot read. I am not a reader.
He was illiterate?
Traditional Islamic scholarship holds that Muhammad was unlettered, could not read or write. Some scholars interpret the phrase differently, but the response he gave was, I cannot. And the angel embraced him. The sources use a word that describes a crushing pressure, tight, overwhelming. Then, Iqra, again. And again Muhammad said he could not, again the embrace, 3 times. And then the angel spoke 15 words in Arabic. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, khalaqa al-insana min alaq, iqra wa rabbuka al-akram. Recite in the name of your Lord who created man from a clinging substance. Recite, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not.
Those are the first 5 verses of what became chapter 96 of the Quran, Surah al-Alaq, the clinging substance.
And what did Muhammad do?
He ran. He ran down the mountain, trembling. The sources say he was deeply afraid, and the fear was specific. He was afraid he had been touched by a jinn, or that he was going mad. The frameworks available to him for making sense of an overwhelming supernatural experience were frightening ones.
He reached home and he said, the Arabic phrase is so immediate, so raw. He said, Zamiluni, Zamiluni, cover me, wrap me. And Khadijah wrapped him in a cloak. Now, I want to stop here for a moment, because what Khadijah does next is, I think, one of the most remarkable moments in this entire story. She does not express doubt. She does not suggest he rest. She does not send for a physician. She listens to what he describes, and then she tells him something specific. She tells him, God will not disgrace you. You are kind to your kin. You help the weak. You support the needy. You honor guests. You aid those in distress.
She grounds the supernatural experience in his character.
I know who you are. And who you are means this could not be something evil. Her argument is essentially the content of a revelation is validated by the character of the person who receives it.
That is actually really sophisticated. That is not superstition. That is an argument.
It is a very Khadijah kind of argument, practical, anchored in observation. She had watched him for years. She had employed him, married him, built a life with him. She knew what he was.
And she became the first person to embrace Islam. Not a warrior, not a powerful man, The first Muslim in history was a businesswoman from Mecca who had proposed her own marriage and run her own trading empire.
And then she took him to someone she trusted with exactly this kind of question.
Waraka ibn Nawfal, Khadija's elderly cousin. The sources describe him as very old and blind by this point, or nearly so. He had spent his life studying the Jewish and Christian scriptures. He had reportedly translated portions of the Gospel into Arabic. He was, in the categories of the time, a scholar of revelation. Khadija took Muhammad to him and described what had happened, and Waraka's response was immediate. He said, "This is the same Namus that came to Moses."
The same angel?
The same holy messenger. He identified the experience as being of the same type as the prophetic experiences described in Scripture. And then he said, and this is where it becomes heartbreaking, he said he wished he were young, because he knew what was coming next. He said, "Your people will drive you out."
He had read enough to know how these stories go. Prophets are not welcomed. They are rejected.
Waraka died shortly after this encounter. He appears in the sources for this one pivotal moment, and a Christian scholar of Arab descent who confirmed the first revelation. And then he is gone. He never saw what came after. He gave what comfort and clarity he could, and then he died.
That is so sad. He understood the significance of what was happening and then just wasn't there for it.
That is often how history works. Now, clue number 2. You remember our parchment. No dots, no vowel marks. Clue 2. The text contains names you might recognize from another tradition. Maryam, Isa. If I showed you this without context, you might think it was a Christian document.
Mary and Jesus.
That is all for now. Hold that. After the first revelation, there was a pause. The sources call it the fatra, a silence. The revelation stopped. For weeks, some sources say months, and Muhammad was, by the accounts, in distress. He had received something overwhelming, and then it was gone. The silence after an overwhelming experience is its own kind of suffering.
There is a verse in the Quran, Surah Ad-Duha, chapter 93, that most scholars believe was among the earliest revealed after the Fatra. The Arabic is extraordinary. It says, "By the morning brightness and by the night when it grows still, your Lord has not abandoned you, nor has he detested you." Your Lord has not abandoned you. That is a revelation addressed to a specific fear, the fear of being left alone again after a moment of connection.
That is really beautiful, actually.
The revelations then continued for 23 years, until Muhammad's death on the 8th of June, 632 CE, 114 chapters, 6,236 verses, revealed in fragments in different contexts over more than 2 decades.
And during those 23 years, Muhammad was not a quiet mystic in a cave. He was a community leader, a political negotiator, a military commander. The revelations came in the middle of battles, in the middle of diplomatic crises, in response to specific questions. The Quran is not an abstract theological document. It is deeply embedded in specific historical moments.
The first Muslims, beyond Khadija, came slowly. Ali ibn Abi Talib, Muhammad's young cousin, approximately 10 years old, who had been living in his household, became one of the first. Zayd ibn Haritha, a freed slave and adopted son. Abu Bakr, a close friend and merchant. Their conversions over the first few years brought others.
And Mecca's leadership, how did they react?
With increasing hostility. As long as Muhammad preached quietly, and only to a small circle, the Quraysh leadership could monitor and manage the situation. When he began preaching publicly, openly declaring that the idols were false, that the Quraysh were wrong, the response escalated. Let me be precise about what was at stake. The Quraysh elite, the merchant families who controlled Mecca, managed the Kaaba, profited from the pilgrimage, stood to lose everything if Muhammad's message succeeded. 360 idols gone meant 360 tribal groups no longer sending pilgrims. The economic model of Mecca collapsed.
And so the persecution was not random violence, it was systematic. Early Muslims who had tribal protection, like Muhammad himself protected by his uncle Abu Talib, were somewhat shielded. but early converts who had no tribal standing, former slaves, freedmen, people without powerful kin, were tortured physically. The sources describe it in detail.
Like who?
Bilal ibn Rabah, an Abyssinian enslaved man, was taken out by his master into the desert, laid on the hot sand with a heavy stone on his chest, and told to renounce Muhammad or die. He kept repeating one word, Ahad, one God.
He survived. Abu Bakr purchased his freedom, and Bilal became the first muezzin, the person who calls the faithful to prayer. His voice, the sources say, was extraordinary.
He went from being tortured for saying one God to being the person who called 1,000 people to prayer.
History contains those transformations. They are not common, but they happen. The persecution intensified. The Quraysh imposed an economic and social boycott on the Banu Hashim clan, cutting them off from trade, from intermarriage, from all commerce. For approximately 3 years, Muhammad's clan was isolated.
And then, in 619 CE, 2 deaths in rapid succession. Khadija died. Abu Talib died. In Islamic tradition, this year is called the Year of Sorrow, Am al-Huzn. The 2 people who had given Muhammad everything, protection, belief, love, were gone within months of each other.
That would break most people.
It nearly did. What followed eventually was the Hijra, the migration to Medina, in 622 CE, the beginning of the Islamic calendar, a new chapter. I think it is time to return to our artifact. You have 2 clues.
Parchment, no dots or vowel marks, and a text that references Mary and Jesus, and yet written in early Arabic.
Is it a translation of something Christian?
Clue number 3. This document is held in a library in the United Kingdom, and the institution that holds it is not a church archive. It is a university library. And when they had the parchment radiocarbon dated, not in some dusty 19th century analysis, but in 2015, using modern techniques at the University of Oxford, they got a result that startled the world. The date range for the parchment was 568 to 645 CE, with 95% confidence.
568 to 645. That range includes the Revelation itself, 610.
The parchment on which this text is written may have been prepared from an animal that lived during Muhammad's own lifetime. The ink may have been applied while people who heard Muhammad speak were still alive.
So what is it?
Our artifact is the Birmingham Quran Manuscript, 2 leaves of parchment written in Hijazi script, one of the earliest forms of Arabic writing, containing portions of chapters 18, 19, and 20 of the Quran. Chapter 19 is named after Maryam, Mary, the mother of Jesus. That is why the text references her name. It was sitting unnoticed in the Mingana collection at the University of Birmingham for decades, misfiled. In 2015, a PhD student named Alba Fideli identified it as extraordinary. Tests confirmed it.
One of the oldest surviving Quran manuscripts in the world, sitting in a research library in Birmingham, England, discovered because someone looked carefully.
I love that an ordinary PhD student found something that extraordinary.
History is full of those moments. It is time to talk about Khadija bint Khuwaylid properly. I want to acknowledge that Khadija is honored within Islamic tradition. She is revered as one of the greatest women in Islamic history, and Muhammad himself spoke of her throughout his life with deep gratitude. Within the tradition, she is not forgotten, but in the broader historical narrative, in the way this story is typically told to a non-Muslim audience, she becomes Muhammad's wife. A support figure, background.
And I think that flattening is worth pushing back on, because the more you look at her, the more central she becomes.
Here is what Khadija actually did. First, she proposed the marriage. In 7th century Arabia, women did not typically propose to men. Khadija had the resources and the standing to make her own choice, and she exercised that choice. She chose Muhammad. Second, she was the first Muslim, the first human being in history to hear the description of the revelation in Cave Hira and say, "I believe you." No hesitation, no conditions. The entire edifice of Islam rests at its foundation on one woman's decision to believe. Third, her wealth funded the survival of the early community. When the Quraysh imposed their boycott, when the early Muslims were being marginalized and impoverished, Khadija's resources were the community's cushion.
And fourth, when she died, Muhammad never fully recovered from the loss. He later said, multiple times, "She believed in me when nobody else did. She accepted me when nobody else would." The year of sorrow, that is what her death meant.
Khadija bint Khuwaylid, independent merchant, first Muslim, funder of the early community, the woman who took Muhammad to Warqa ibn Nawfal and turned an overwhelming, terrifying experience into the beginning of a tradition. The first follower of every great movement is the most important one. So, the person who says yes before there is any evidence that yes is the right answer. Khadija was that person. Remember Khadija. Remember the name.
Remember the name.
Remember the name. All right, the choose your own history moment. I'm ready.
It is a night in 610 CE. Muhammad has come home from Cave Hira trembling. He is in a state of shock. He has described what he experienced, the angel, the command, the words, and he is afraid he may have gone mad. You are Khadija. You are one of the most respected merchants in Mecca. Your reputation is everything. You have children, you have a trading network, you have a comfortable and secure life. What do you do?
Option 1, you believe him immediately, fully, unconditionally. You wrap him in a cloak, you console him, you tell him God would not deceive a man of his character, and you take him to Warqa for confirmation. You effectively become the first Muslim, which means you put everything you have behind a claim that sounds, to a rational outside observer, extraordinary.
Option 2, you love him, but you treat this as a possible mental crisis. You seek help from physicians. The Arab world had medical traditions. You tell him to rest, to keep this private, to recover. You protect him from public humiliation and protect your own family from association with something that could be deeply dangerous.
If I am honest, if I really try to put myself in that room, I think I would be frightened. I think I would want to believe him, but I also think I would be aware of what belief would cost.
But if you go with option 2, if you treat it as illness, like what happens? Does Islam not exist?
That is exactly the question. Muhammad's first response to the revelation was fear and doubt. What he needed at that moment was someone to say, "You are not mad. What you experienced was real." Khadija gave him that. If she had not, if she had expressed doubt, sought medical intervention, kept him quiet, the entire trajectory of the next 23 years might have been different.
There is a reason Islamic theology places such emphasis on her response. It was not just kind, it was decisive.
What actually happened? Khadija chose option 1, and everything that followed. The continuing revelations, the growing community, the Hijra, the transformation of Arabia, the spread of Islam across 3 continents within a century of Muhammad's death. All of it flows from a widow in Mecca who looked at her trembling husband and said, "I believe you." What happened in Cave Hira in 610 CE eventually produced one of the most influential civilizations in human history. Within a century of Muhammad's death in 632 CE, Islamic armies and traders had carried the new faith from the Iberian Peninsula in the west to the borders of China in the east. Not always peacefully, war and conquest were part of this expansion. But alongside the armies came scholars, merchants, administrators, builders.
The Abbasid Caliphate, based in Baghdad from the 8th century onward, created what we call the Golden Age of Islam. The Bait al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, became one of the great centers of intellectual life in the world. Greek philosophy was translated, studied, commented upon, extended. Aristotle survived in Arabic translation when much of Europe had lost access to him.
And the word algebra, that is actually Arabic, right?
Al-Jabr. From Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi's 9th century work on equations. Algorithm from his name. The Arabic numerals we use today, including the concept of zero, came through Arabic scholarship from Indian mathematics, the modern sciences of astronomy, optics, medicine, deeply shaped by scholars working in the Islamic tradition.
And there is one aspect of the Quran's legacy that I think is underappreciated in Western contexts: the tradition of hifz, memorization. A hafiz is someone who has memorized the entire Quran, 114 chapters, 6,236 verses in their original Arabic.
The whole thing?
The whole thing, and there are millions of them. More people have memorized this one text than any other written work in human history. It is a living oral tradition. You can hear the Quran recited in exactly the same way today as it was recited in Muhammad's lifetime in Mecca and Medina in the 7th century.
Today, 1.9 billion people identify as Muslim, approximately 1 in 4 people on Earth. Mosques stand on every continent. The call to prayer, Allahu Akbar, echoes across 1,000 cities every day, 5 times a day. It all began with 15 words spoken in a cave on a mountainside above Mecca.
I want to end with something I keep coming back to when I think about this story.
We talk a great deal about great men in history: generals, emperors, conquerors. And Muhammad does appear in those categories too. He was a military leader, a political architect, a founder of a state. All of that is true. But the story of 610 CE, the actual night, the actual aftermath, is a story about a man who was terrified, a man who ran home trembling, a man who said, "Cover me," who needed someone to tell him he was not mad. And the person who did that, quietly, practically, with full conviction, was a woman, a businesswoman, a widow, someone who had already built one life entirely on her own terms and who was willing to risk all of it on the character of the man she had chosen.
History just hits different when you know the full story. See you next time.
What a journey today. From a cave on a mountainside above Mecca to a manuscript sitting in a university library in Birmingham. One more thing before we go. Studying the ancient world teaches you to think in long-time horizons, and that connects beautifully to our partner, Cyprus Real Returns. They offer a strategic, long-term approach to wealth building. Secure real estate in Cyprus with guaranteed 6 to 12% annual returns, fully backed by the Cyprus Land Registry. Professional management makes it completely hands-off. With Cyprus tourism booming and property values rising nearly 8% annually, the returns can fund the kind of historical exploration we love. The places we talk about, you can actually visit them. Visit CYPRUSREALRETURNS.com, and we will see you on the next journey.